You're joining me for the coverage of Patrick versus Phil, and this should be a good game. Um, all right, Patrick with the black pieces, Phil with the white pieces. Let's see what happens. 10 minutes each. Patrick, the slight favorite on ranking here, and we have Queen's Pawn game, very popular. Um, All right. This move a little bit passive, maybe letting black keep control of the light squares here. But then, excellent move, striking back at the center, fighting for the center control from the edge, supported by the bishop. Black defends the pawn, and now you have an option. You could take it, but black is blocked in their bishop. The bishop can't get out. If you take the pawn, you now release the bishop. You may not want to take it. Conventional theory is just leave the pawn there. Let black do the capturing, which develops your bishop. So you're kind of in a position here where neither side wants to take necessarily. White pushes the pawn and releases the tension a bit. It does cut the diagonal for the dark squared bishop on the black side, but probably leaving the tension here was maybe slightly better. Black challenges the piece right away, wants that space back. White defends, black takes, white takes, and now this pawn's a little bit better. It can't be challenged by any pawns in the B or D files because there aren't any there. So the pawn getting better now. Black develops a knight, and white immediately with the pin, pinning it to the piece, threatening to capture it. Black defends. White goes for development, getting another piece active, and black tries to kick out the bishop, saying now you have to decide if you're going to capture and trade pieces or back off. Probably in this case, backing off is the better move just because it keeps the pin. Backing up this way, not quite as good. You just release the pressure on the knight. The nice thing about backing up here was there's no B pawn to later kick you out. So the bishop was stable on the A4 square. Black fighting for the center, trying to break up the connect 4. White pushes a pawn. Don't like this as much just because it blocks the natural development square for the knight and cuts off the diagonal of the queen. So this pawn is kind of in the way of the rest of the pieces now. It also weakens the E3 square, but there's no immediate threat to capture E3. Okay, like this, getting the piece out of the way to prepare castling. Capturing was probably good here. Looks like captures, knight takes, wins a pawn. So capturing was definitely better. White takes the chance to defend the pawn now and develop a piece, preparing castling themselves. And rather than castling, white kind of jumps out here to the side. Unfortunately, it's staring at this pawn, and that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So, the dark bishop is definitely not the good bishop in this case. Good bishop right now is the light bishop that has access to some light squares. Unfortunately, a bunch of them are not currently usable, but still considered the good bishop. And after trade here, the e-file opens up, and as soon as this happens, you want to be thinking about getting your king off of this file. Black's going to put a rook there. It's going to be staring at your king, and those pieces can move off of the file very quickly. Okay, black looking to get the queen into a better position, and white lining up a threat on the king side. It's currently protected by the knight, but if you can distract that knight, you can win the pawn. Again, the king needs to move, and now Black lines up the rook with the king, and it's of critical importance now that the king gets off of that file. So white does castle, removing any discovered damage to the king. Black pushes a pawn, maybe giving the bishop a little bit more room to go to. Maybe taking the square away from the bishop, but it's already protected, so maybe the idea is to like jump the knight into this position. That actually looks pretty good. Now it's defended, so if you capture with the bishop, you have to give up the bishop for the knight. The pawn would recapture and get to a better file. And the problem with this knight move now is it attacks both the queen and the bishop. You might have to move the queen, and then knight captures the bishop. Queen takes the bishop, and you've had to trade. You got an unfavorable trade. You've had to trade off your good bishop for a knight. So we see this taking a jab at the queen. Queen has to move. Getting a rook to the open file, preparing to contest it. Kick the bishop back out. Bishop decides to go back. Maybe slightly better was this, keeping this diagonal active. But maybe white kind of has ideas of pushing some pawns and trying to break down the structure in front of the king here. So in that case, maybe d3 was better. But d3 walks back into this knight move, and we see it now, and it comes with a threat on the queen. You have to deal with it. Best move here is just to capture it. You'd rather give up your bad bishop that is staring at the same colored pawns than give up your good bishop. So you don't want to play queen takes queen, or queen moves out of the way, then queen takes bishop. You'd rather play bishop takes knight here. After bishop takes knight, pawn takes, this isn't what happened in the game, but after this position, you can find a new home for your knight. Maybe jumping him into the game here, a little further down the board. Just have to be careful that it doesn't get trapped. A move like this might actually trap the knight, so maybe the knight has to find a better move. And that's a little bit unfortunate. Maybe knight can go to the side here. He doesn't like to be on the side of the board, so this isn't great. Basically, this knight b4 move was great for black. Regardless of what white does here, it's not a position they want to go into. White decides to move the queen, and black really had an opportunity to capture the bishop there and take out the strong bishop. Instead decides to double up an attack on it, and now the bishop needs to probably capture the other bishop to get out of the threat. It could also move, but the only other good square is the b1, which disconnects the rooks, and the rooks aren't very happy about that. So best move here, capturing the bishop. And the bishop falls short, almost looks like a mouse slip, but there's an idea here. The idea is that the bishop is defended by the knight on this position, and it's poking at the rook. So now I guess if bishop takes, knight takes, maybe the knight ends up on a square on b5 that it likes. You still have to worry about this pawn push, but in this scenario, it looks like you can come back to the square that you want. So a little bit different than last time. Black does capture it, knight takes, pawn does push, and knight has to go back, kind of losing a tempo. You can see why capturing the bishop might have been a bit better, because you capture the bishop, rook has to take back, and then it's white's turn again. At the end of this exchange, it's black's turn, and so white's kind of lost a bit of a move here. Black decides to reroute the knight to a more active square, maybe. Although, these pawns are doing a good job of shutting down the knight's active squares. It's hard to see where it's going to go from here. Maybe planning to take a really long route around? I'm not sure. Or maybe headed back and then headed this way, eyeing up the d4 pawn. D4 pawn is a backwards pawn. It's got no pawns that can defend it from behind. It has to be defended by minor pieces. So it's considered weak, and if you can you can reroute this knight to attack it, you might be able to get the bishop lined up, maybe start to pile on the pieces on this, and white will eventually have a hard time defending it. Okay, white moves the knight out of the way, potentially keeping an eye on the rook on the other side. Now the rooks see each other, so that might introduce some tactics. And black finds a pin here, pinning the knight to the queen. Already getting spicy here. You can't move the knight, otherwise you'll drop the queen. So if you leave the pin in place, black is going to add attackers to the knight, and he's going to win it. So you have to either add defense to it via one of these two moves, or well, it's probably your only option. You can't move the queen out of the pin, say to this square, because it's in use by a pawn. There's no other squares the queen can go to defend the knight and stay off of the diagonal. At the same time, the queen is busy. The queen has to guard specifically the c2 square, because there's a fork here. If the queen ever leaves the defense of c2, black gets a fork. So maybe capturing that is an option before things get too crazy. Probably best move here, g3, defending the piece, giving you some more time to get a defense in order. Or I really like knight e2 here. I think it works out okay. Throwing in a capture of the rook can kind of diffuse some tactics there. It does put the queen on the open file now, and the queen would love to come to this square if it can distract the rook and the queen, but not yet. Each player's got 2.5 minutes left on the clock. We see the defense of the knight now, and black wants to find another way to defend it. Queen's on the wrong square to immediately attack it, and there's no easy squares that it can get to attack it from the e-file. We see bishop capturing, which kind of resolves some of the tension in the position. Queen can recapture now, not messing up the pawn structure. There's no more fork here because the rook took. So knight coming to c2 is not a big threat anymore. We see pawn captures, and that kind of breaks up the pawn structure in front of the king. Sort of weakens the pawns around the king. Not ideal. Queen moves to potentially take advantage of that right away. Maybe coming into a square where you can find some space around the king. Unfortunately, there's no easy access there. Maybe just moving to f6 and trying to put some pressure there. I'm not really sure. Rook comes to e1, threatening the queen. Queen moves out of the way to that h4 square that was safe. And there's no immediate threat here. The queen can keep an eye on all of these pieces. If they lose defenders, there's potential for them to fall. Maybe there's an idea of bringing some more attacking pieces in, or like we showed before, trying to get the knight to e6 to put a double attack on this f4 pawn, which is now going to be hard to defend. I guess you've got this knight move back, but there's some ideas there. Queen moves out of the way and drops defense of c2, but goes to a square that can allow the knight to fork the two pieces. Just missed the tactic, and Patrick sees it immediately, and this is game over. White resigns in this position, and the problem is there's no good way to resolve this. No matter what you do, black is winning some material here. Maybe your best option is try to intercept the queen, cut off the attack, but I'm not sure that works. I guess, there's queen takes, king takes, knight takes. You still lose the rook for the knight. Oh, there's a beautiful tactic here. Black can play knight takes e1, and you can't take the knight because the queen defends it through the other knight. And it looks like black left the queen hanging, but if you take it, black has this beautiful fork. The king has to move, and black wins back the queen, and rather than losing a single, rather than exchanging, so originally I looked at exchanging the rook for the knight, which is still favorable. In this exchange, black is just up the whole rook. White doesn't get anything back for it. So, yeah, there's some crushing tactics here at the end. Either way, black wins this one cleanly. So, moving on to game 2, Patrick winning the first round. Phil's got to get back into it now. Patrick with the white pieces. And I guess this is the Scandinavian defense. And queen takes, leaves the queen in the center of the board. A little bit better, I like knight c3 here, because it attacks the queen and forces the queen to decide where to go. Queen has to decide, is it going back? Is it going to try and stay on the side of the board? Can't go to h5 because it's a protected square. Probably don't want to go to that one. So I think the idea is a5 is a safe square, but you do have to be careful in this because the queen can easily get chased around the board. So white doesn't have the most challenging reply. Lets the queen have some control of the center of the board. Gets some good development in here. Black fighting back. And white does attack the queen now, and queen can't take this pawn because it's defended by the knight, and the queen has to decide where to go. Oh, but gets a little tricky. Rather than moving the queen away, pins the knight so that the knight can't take the queen. Very, very tricky. As long as that king is in place and that pin is in place, the queen is safe. White attacks the queen. Now you can't retreat the bishop because the queen would hang. So your only two choices are going back or taking the knight. The problem is if you go back, white's going to play b4, cutting off the attack on the knight, breaking your pin, and then both your bishop and your queen are going to be under attack. You're going to lose. So your real only choice is to take the knight. Black plays it. Take back. Queen goes to the corner of the board, attacking the piece. Looks like Phil knows this opening. He seems very comfortable in it. He seems to know what to do. We have bishop to the c3, defend the c3 pawn. Seems to be important. I don't think you want to drop it. Dropping that pawn would come with a fork on the king and the rook. And even if you can defend the fork, it seems like an important pawn that you don't want to drop. Black develops, white develops. We have black taking a really active position here. White castles. And back to the center of the board where we can sort of keep a good eye on things. Looks like now the d4 pawn is under attack. We've got 1, 2, 3 attackers on it. White has got 2 defenders on it, and maybe a third if you can move out this bishop quickly with an attack, but I don't think so. So it looks like that pawn could be captured. White gets spicy and says, well, if you want to capture the pawn, you got to do it with your queen, and then you're going to lose it, so move your queen. Queen falls back, keeping an eye on the d4 pawn. And now there's an opportunity here that you can just push the pawn, locking those two in place in your enemy's position, in your opponent's position. Maybe they're not your enemy. Maybe they're your friend. All right, so that's interesting. You probably don't want to take here. I think it just gives your queen, gives the black queen too much activity on this open file after you capture. You're not really winning the pawn anyway because black has got two defenders on it. So I think I really like pushing and just closing that file down, taking control of the file, taking control of some of these spaces. Yeah, this seems really good. It also controls all the light squares around black's camp, and black's got the light squared bishop but doesn't have a dark squared bishop to fight back on the dark squares. So this seems like a really strong strategic idea. Okay, so with the bishop move, we are threatening to capture the piece. We've got 3 attackers on it now, and there's only 2 defenders. Queen goes over, so that can add a defender to the e5 pawn. And now we see the push, which is great. Knight is forced to move, eyeing up the c2 pawn. And now you might want to capture this just to take some of that pressure off. In fact, I don't think the knight is safe there. After the pawn recaptures, this bishop can capture the pawn. White wins the pawn, is up a pawn, and I don't see what black got out of that. White sees it, captures, and black loses the pawn now. Okay, we see taking control of the dark squares around the bishop. This is good, muting the effect of this dark squared bishop. A lot of the pawns on dark squares. This is really good. Smart play. Black has a light squared bishop, so the light squared bishop controls the light squares on the board. You want your pawns on dark squares to control the dark squares of the board. So they work together in this respect and can kind of cover the weaknesses of the others. White doesn't have that problem as much because he's got two bishops still. So I really like this idea of black's to cover this. Lining up the rook with the king and queen, that has to make you nervous. Black needs to immediately move the queen or the king. Preferably the king, maybe castling queenside. The rook will end up staring at this d5 pawn, and will give you some compensation for that, for castling in the direction that you maybe didn't want to. And he does it. Okay, white attacks the bishop, and this is sort of a pin, but the bishop can just capture. At the same time, it comes with an attack on the queen. So this is a revealed threat here. Patrick finds a really strong move, attacking both the undefended bishop and the queen at the same time. And now it's really tough for black to figure out what to do. You could look at something like capturing the bishop, and after rook captures the queen, your bishop captures the other queen, then the rook captures your bishop, and you have to count at the end of that what all the material loss was. It looks like the queens are off the board and the bishops are off the board, and at the end your rook falls. So black wins in that scenario. I think that's probably the right move here, is capturing the bishop. It looks odd because it looks like you're ignoring the threat on your queen. Black moves out of the way, and now they've sort of walked into the pin though. But this also comes with a new threat on the bishop. White really needs just to capture here because, or maybe defend with a pawn. But there's now two pieces attacking this, and the queen is the only defender. Yeah, so the queen comes to f3 with the idea of attacking the bishop, but the problem is it's black's turn. Black can now just capture the bishop, and you can't recapture because it's defended by the queen. Black misses that opportunity, which would have turned the game around. Black would have, probably been, would have been winning in that position, but took the time to add an attacker, and now white has a chance to get out of this now. After takes, it's just a trade. White's still up the pawn from before. Needs to just move this bishop out of harm's way. And black jumps around, makes a new threat on one of the weak pawns. White needs to find a way to defend it. Moving it's an interesting idea. Black can just capture it. The problem is that it damages black's pawn structure. So white might be able to get some use out of this sacrificed pawn. The material's even now, but the position's not. The queen can hop into this diagonal here, attacking the king, and you get the rook to the b file, and the combination of the two is quite deadly. So black's going to have to play carefully to defend there. We do see the rook come to that open file. Another rook comes to this open file. White's got a weak back rank at the moment. Needs to consider pushing a pawn here. You could capture. Black will probably capture back, and then you have to remember that your other rook can't leave the back rank. Fortunately, you have a bishop well positioned to prevent checks on this square, on the e1 square. White kind of sidesteps the exchange, doesn't want to trade. Black queen, now because white was a little bit slow kind of getting an attack over on the king, has time to make room for the king to get out, plus eye up some pawns here. White needs to find a creative way to defend both of those. I'm not really sure how. Oh, here we go. This is very nice. Blocking the attack on the c pawn and defending the a pawn directly. Very nice move. Rook moves here, possibly planning to double the rooks and hitting the back rank here. If you can distract either one of these pieces, that could be checkmate. White finds a really nice check here, hitting the king from across the board, also hitting a pawn. And the problem is that black can't just retreat. Black has to block with a rook or a knight because there's no free squares to go to. The queen cuts off the diagonal and the rook cuts off the escape from behind. So we block with a rook, but now this is potentially already problematic. I think the correct strategy here is doubling up the rooks, threatening checkmate on the back rank here. Black's not organized. Well, black wanted double rooks as to threaten the back rank mate itself, and you probably need 3 rooks to get through the current defenses. But if you can force one of them out of the way, maybe 2 would do it. But 1 by itself is the e1 square is just too covered right now for the back rank to be an actual threat. So rook b1 here is kind of giving black a ton of problems. White takes a chance to capture a pawn, and you kind of give black an opportunity to get a little bit more organized. This does come with new threats of check on the back, and with this rook on the other side here, it can be quite deadly. Black pushes a pawn, exposing an attack on the queen, and the queen takes the opportunity to throw in a check. You can see that there's a lot of pieces hanging here. King still can't move out of the way because there's no open squares to go to. Only options are blocking with a piece, and probably the knight move blocks really nicely. Gets covers the f6 pawn. Rook e8 here is an option too. Just allows white to capture the pawn, but maybe wards off any more severe problems. This one looks good, but it has a tactical problem right away. You can play rook b8, checking the king, and it's an attraction technique. You force the king to accept the piece, and then you take the rook. And if you're saying, well, what if the king just declines the sacrifice? Let's look at this. So let's say, okay, if king takes, queen takes rook, and now both the king and the rook are hit. So you say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to run to the side. Well, the problem is the queen takes because the piece was attacked twice, and this is actually checkmate. The king has nowhere to go. So this block doesn't work at all. It drops a whole rook. White doesn't see the tactic, instead picking up the pawn, attacking the rook again, and attacking the other pawn. Okay, we have connecting the rooks, getting a little bit more defense together, and again, white can look at doubling the rooks and attacking here. At the moment, the only escape square is d7. White does that this time, and the king has to be very careful here. The black king has to be really careful here. The only square he can get to is d7. This might already have some serious problems. Queen goes back, and I think already you have a check. King is forced to move, and I think in this position you can you actually have a checkmate here. So rook check, king moves, and then rook d8 check, and black's only move is to take the piece, but then queen e6 is checkmate, covering all the squares that the king can go to, with the pawn covering the one escape. So that's already pretty challenging. White instead, Patrick chooses queen g7 here, and the idea being to cover the escape square. So takes an extra turn to cover the escape square. Black now has to scramble to make a new escape for the king. Maybe throwing the knight in the way to block the impending check, or even just sacrificing the queen, just doing anything to prevent the rooks from controlling that back file and controlling the queen from controlling this escape square. Just the combination here is too deadly. Rook moves and misses the fact that the king has no escape squares, and so rook b8 now is checkmate. King can't move to any squares, can't capture, and no piece can capture the b8 rook. So that is it. Phil only had 8 seconds left on the clock here at the end, so really came down to a lot of time pressure. Time was used really well to advantage there, and hard to figure it out. I'd say turning point here was this c5 move by Patrick, and encouraging Phil to recapture and break open the pawn structure on the king side there. Really had a huge impact to the rest of the game. All right, so going back to our B brackets, we've got Patrick with 2 points beating out Phil. We'll move on. See ya.